So, Corey, in your mind, who do you have as the best defensive player of all time?
Man, so many different options for defensive player of all time. You got like Ben Wallace, Dikembe Mutombo, Olajuwon. You got a lot of people, but by the time I say Kawhi Leonard. I have Kawhi Leonard. I'm not saying he's necessarily like he's there right now, but I think by the time he's done with his career, he will. Um, this guy has more steals in his career than he does fouls.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, that's crazy because today's game is so predicated around offense, so lenient to offense. You could pull so many ticky tack fouls, and for me to be able to play great defense and not foul is very, very hard. And I think Kawhi Leonard does that in this era. And you got guys that are so skilled offensively. You got some guys you got to pick up at half court because they're so deadly, and so many guys that have this, innate ability to pull fouls. He has 2 defensive player of the years. He's always making all defensive teams. And I think he probably can win a couple more defensive player of the years. And for me, which I didn't point out in the last segment, like there's no team that you build around a strictly offensive guy. A guy has to have some offensive strength for you to build around him. And for me, like if you're building around a player like Kawhi Leonard, who's a phenomenal offensive player, and then you can also come on the other end. Like he can be the best offensive player and defensive player on the court at any given time. And to me, that's like a lot harder than just being strictly a defensive player and that's it because you're just focused on one thing. It's kind of like, if in football, if you were to be asked to be the quarterback and then you got to go be a cornerback, it's like your coach and your team and you're asking for a lot. So it's kind of like similar in that regard. So I'd have to go with Kawhi.
Well, I mean, I'm not gonna say I disagree with that, but that's a good pick. I see why it's pretty valid. My pick personally is Ben Wallace. Um, it's a valid point that you said. Someone who could do it on both ends, who's basically really demanded a lot on the offensive end and has demanded a lot on the defensive end.
Mm-hmm.
However, though, when somebody is looked at as just as somebody, when I could say somebody basically can go to the Hall of Fame strictly off defense, of dominating a game from a defensive standpoint, it gotta be Ben Wallace, man. Because especially and people don't put this to account, even during his era, he made some quite tough blocks, plays without fouling. It was a big debate with me between Ben Wallace and Scottie Pippen. They neck and neck. But I say more so Ben Wallace because he had to make his living off of defense. Obviously rebound, but he was supreme from a defensive standpoint. Like you could put him against anybody, And he was only 6'8", and he was giving Shaq a lot of trouble. He was giving opposing centers a lot of trouble, and he had a presence about him.
Yeah.
So that it made his impact in the game made a huge difference to any player, not just a subpar player. He had an impact on really good players, sound offensive players. The all-stars and the superstars we talk about all the time. I was just watching how he blocked shots, the angles he come from, the chase down half court block, playing in the half court set, and he can come out of nowhere and just get a chase down block. You ask a center or somebody in his position to do that now, whether he's a good defensive player or not, I don't think he can make those same kind of plays without getting a foul call. So I mean, for me, that's my pick right now for best defensive player of the year because I really think he can dominate a game just on that end. itself.
Hmm. I think also when you talk about best, even for an offensive player, when you talk about best offensive player, best defensive player, whatever it is, I also like to look at the versatility somebody has. I mean, you have a lot of players who've won Defensive Player of the Year. Tied with Ben Wallace for 4 is Dikembe Mutombo also has 4 Defensive Player of the Years.
Mm-hmm.
You got Olajuwon has 2. Olajuwon's all-time leader in blocks. Dikembe Mutombo's number 2 in
Mm-hmm.
blocks. You got, I think Dwight Howard won like 3 Defensive Player of the Years in a row. He's led the league in blocks several times. Um, it's kind of like a catch-22 because when you're like a center and you're just in the paint and coming in to help to block shots and alter shots, like you're kind of just doing more so one thing on defense. But like if you are like the main defender of that team and that team has a really good defensive rating, like you're a great defensive team, like mainly because of you, like that kind of keys in on your point as making a huge difference on one end of the floor. But then again, it's like then I look at somebody else who has the versatility to be able to be in the paint to block a shot or alter a shot, but then they can also step out on the perimeter. That's kind of like where with Draymond Green, for example. I think Draymond Green's a great defender. He's good in the paint and all that stuff. But I feel like against offensive players, and he says he's the best defensive player of all time, which to me is nonsense. But
Mm-hmm.
I feel like if you're a really good offensive player and you get Draymond Green on an island, I think that's where his defensive production for me it drops because
Mm-hmm.
I feel like he doesn't have the quickness and all that stuff to stay in front of guys all the way on the perimeter and just lock them up. For the most part,
Mm-hmm.
he's better like in the team defense, being in the paint and all that. So I don't know. It's kind of toss up.
Yeah. Yeah. I could see where. I could see where you would see like, all right, um, to your point where you said about versatility on a defensive end or the offensive end. I could see where you have a case for other people. For like, and this is maybe a point that I don't know if I mentioned this, but if a player, to me, right, if a player can mix and imbalance aggressiveness and playing without fouling and having an impact on the game, like impacting players the way they shoot the ball, like their mentality coming into the game is now they know, all right, I got this guy, on me. It's quite a psychological mix up for some players. So
Right.
if you could balance all those things together, that's when you got my pick, and it's very very few guys who could do it. It's the Rodmans, the Scottie Pimpens, the Ben Wallaces. After that, like I've seen it in spurts from different guys. Maybe you could say Kawhi because he's long. He has those physical abilities, and you have to have the physical abilities because to be, especially like when you're like guarding against fours, and guys who are bigger, you gotta have incredible timing, and you gotta have strength, and you have to be able to like you have to have good balance because if your core is not strong enough, when you go up for a block, you'll never go on a plane. You'll come down awkwardly because one part of your body is trying to support the other. So
Right.
like it makes it like for like a young guy like Mitchell Robinson on the New York Knicks. I think he still got ways to go because
Oh, he
he
does.
has his body has not built up yet, and he still has to grow physically to be the kind of player that really, really, what I'm saying, is making the case for multiple defensive players of the year
Right.
because you got to play without fouling. If you can't play without fouling, you don't help your team because you can't play enough minutes to stay in the game. What help
Right.
does that? What help does that do for your team? And
Right.
then when you do that, when you're in that situation, teams are gonna start gunning for you.
Right.
You know, They start gunning for you. All right, let's get him in foul trouble. Get him out the game real quick.
Right. And I think that people, it also depends too, because you have a lot of analysts who talk about guys. For example, if you're talking about an offensive player today, people are going to say, well, if you're talking about James Harden, talking about, whoever it is, they'll say, well, a lot of the stuff that he's doing today, he wouldn't get away with back in the day because it's a softer era. You don't get to, hit people in the face and get away with all types of stuff like that. And to me, it's kind of like when I talk about if there's, a question of who's the best player of all time or who's the best scorer of all time. Like when I look at MJ and you averaging 30 plus in like a tough era where a lot of calls they don't make, you have to play tough. And like if you put him in this era, I think he'd average 50 plus because he'd go to the line a lot. Same thing for me is on defense. Like I think this is like the hardest era to play defense and not get a foul call. Like, because everything in this era is a foul. Like, if you can be a great defender in this era and not get into foul trouble, to me, it's like, it's a tough thing to deal with. And I think the matchups too in this era, I feel like are a lot harder. It depends on the position, of course, but I'm trying to think like back in that era, who did Ben Wallace have to guard aside from Shaq? He probably had to guard like Tim Duncan.
That's a juggernaut in himself. Kevin
Yeah.
Garnett. These are guys who all could face up and shoot as well.
Yeah. Well, except for Shaq. But yeah.
Amari Stoudemire when he was good.
Yeah.
Yeah, quite a few. He had tasks, but it made the Pistons good, when he was, because he can be able to guard. He can like even if you switch on him, he can still guard his position, because he had the physical tools. Physical tools come a long way too, and being able to utilize your body properly.
Yeah. I think that's probably the thing with Ben Wallace that impresses me a lot is being able to, in a way, like carry the team to the finals twice, and you've been in Eastern Conference Finals once or twice. Outside of that, and mainly they were getting there because they were a cohesive unit. Everybody had chemistry, but his presence in the paint was really a force to be reckoned with, and was a huge key to the Pistons' success while it lasted. But yeah.